Hello, everyone, and thank you for having us. We are Tine Rassalle and Sophie Schmidt, and we're glad to be able to present to you our research today concerning the roles we play in history, narratives about women in historical digital strategy games. Gender representation in video games has been a highly divisive topic since at least the so-called Gamergate in 2014. In August of that year, a harassment campaign targeted several women in the video games industry. Notable game developers Zoe Quinn and Brianna Wu, as well as feminist media critic Anita Sarkeesian. Harassment campaigns against Quinn and others included doxing, which is the researching and publicly broadcasting of private or identifying information on the internet, threats of rape, and death threats. Gamergate harassment was orchestrated largely through anonymous message boards such as 4chan, 8chan, and Reddit, in which Gamergaters accused predominantly female game reviewers and journalists of having a leftist, progressive, and feminist biased agenda. However, research on Gamergate has shown that the phenomenon was actually part of a long-running culture war against efforts to diversify the traditionally male video game community, particularly targeting outspoken women. Video games were becoming more sophisticated and started to appeal to a greater diversity of people. Naturally, debates about what is a legitimate game, who gets to be a gamer, and which critics get to define those terms arose. Powerful questions for any evolving art form.
A number of studies have highlighted that women now represent about 50% of players of digital games. But the ratio of lead representation of female characters within games is still quite small. And we want to give a disclaimer here. We are not talking about the representation of non-binary diverse characters within video games or non-binary players. This is a topic that's even more understudied and would deserve its own presentation. We are just looking at the male versus female representation here. In the aftermath of Gamergate, many were hoping that the Electronic Entertainment Expo, or E3, of 2015 would be sort of a turning point for female representation. However, a study undertaken by Feminist Frequency showed that of the 76 games that were featured at the expo, only 7 featured female lead heroes. That's less than 10%. So, of course, the cultural movement takes time, and the researchers kept tracking the amount of female lead roles in games over the following years. Their observations, though, were disappointing for several years in a row. At the 5th E3 after Gamergate, only 6 out of 126 games featured female protagonists. That's less than 5%. On the other hand, male lead characters represented about 21%. And it was only in this year, in 2020, that the numbers finally changed. The numbers of female representations almost doubled, which is quite a sudden rise, and now they are almost in the same league as the numbers for sole male lead. You can also see in this graphic that another positive trend has been happening over the years, which is the increase in options between playing as a female, male, or gender ambiguous character, which we of course applaud as well. After the number of the last years, we are positively surprised by this change and looking forward to the development in the next years. Will this change stay?
For a long time, the main reason for why male protagonists were chosen in almost all video games was the argument that video games are for boys, and boys want to see themselves represented on the screen. Now, however, women make up almost half of the gaming community, and this contention no longer holds true. Another reason for the underrepresentation of women characters in games that has often been cited is the fact that there are so few female game developers. Indeed, in 2017, women made up only about 22% of the video game industry. However, this trend is slowly changing as well, as more and more women discover that video game development is an agreeable profession. A quick Twitter search reveals there are now multiple public-facing initiatives to bring women into the industry, with organizations like Women Who Code, Girl Geek Academy, and FemDevs. Hopefully, this trend will shift the culture within the developer community, as well as the way women are represented in games. There are many other discussions for the underrepresentation of women in games, but the last reason we want to highlight is the fact that first-person shooters and sports games make up the largest share of games developed each year. And in these particular games, the number of female characters is especially low. As a genre, first-person shooters have been the most analyzed in the treatment of women characters. So in this paper, we want to look at historical strategy games and see how they stand on female representation.
In our talk, we will focus on the Sid Meier's Civilization and Age of Empires series. Of course, these are not the only historical strategy games that are out there, but they are perhaps the most popular and influential and form good case studies for our analysis. We will start by giving a quantitative overview of the development of both series and then follow this up with 3 small qualitative case studies as examples of female representation within those video game series. Sid Meier's Civilization was first released in 1991. There are now 6 main games in the series, plus a number of expansion packs and spin-off games, as well as board games inspired by it. The series is considered a formative example of the 4X genre, in which players achieve victory through 4 routes: explore the territory, expand your empire, exploit the available resources, and exterminate your rivals. All titles in the series share similar gameplay, centered on building a civilization on a macro scale from prehistory up to the near future. Each turn allows the player to move their units on the map, research technologies, build or improve new cities, and initiate negotiations with the human or computer-controlled players. Age of Empires was first released in 1997, and the series has 8 games in total. Each installment of the game focuses on a different historical period, from the Stone Age through the early modern period. It is a 4X game as well, but in contrast to the Civilization series, it is not turn-based, but a real-time strategy game, meaning all players act at the same time. Here too, it is your aim to build up your economy and conquer the other civilizations on the map. In both games, you can either play scenarios or campaigns which give a structured storyline to follow, or an open game against either the AI or other human players. Both Sid Meier's Civilization, which we will call Civilization or just Civ in the future, and Age of Empires have been widely successful. Civ having sold probably almost 40 million and Age of Empires over 20 million copies worldwide. They have influenced the most defining elements of historical strategy genre and are to this day enjoyed by millions of people around the globe. This is why we chose these games for our research.
For our analysis of the female representation in the games, we played the games ourselves, and we also went through the largest fandom wikis of Age of Empires and Civilization in order to collect our information. As a first step, we gathered the names of the female leaders or personalities of the different civilizations and tribes within the games, and noted which units are represented as female in Age of Empires 1 to 3 with the expansions, but here without the definite edition that just came out, and Civ 1 to 6. We believe we were able to create a complete list, although of course small errors might still occur. From this data, we then asked, what is the percentage of female leaders in these games? Is there a change through time? Can we see patterns in who is chosen to be a female leader? What are their stories in the game? How are they portrayed? On the levels of the units, we asked, which specific units are depicted as female? In what areas of society, be it the economy, politics, or military, the 3 aspects on which strategy games usually focus on, are female characters shown?
In this figure, we show the percentage of female leaders in the games and their expansions respectively. Every dot represents a game or an expansion upon the original game. The HD versions and definitive editions are at the moment not included, nor is the fantasy game Age of Mythology or the online games. So, in the graph we can immediately see that in only one game, more than 30% of all leaders are female. In Civilizations 2. In this particular game, every culture has 2 leaders to choose from, 1 male and 1 female. Often these leaders have nothing to do with each other. Sometimes they are an actual historical figure, but sometimes they are completely made up. For example, Shakala, which is simply a feminized name of the known Zulu leader Shaka. The la ending implies femininity to Indo-European language speakers, but in reality, in the easy Zulu language, the feminine version of a name is shown by adding a prefix. Clearly, the producers did not go out of their way looking for actual historical women in each culture, like Zulu queens or female war chiefs, such as Nandi, Shaka's mother. Nonetheless, it is unfortunate that this absolute gender equality never appeared again in the two series. In all other games, women make up only between 10 to 30% of the leaders. In Age of Empires 1 and 2, even less than 5%. This is partly because there are a lot more leaders represented in these games in general. It's not that less female leaders were chosen, but that the number of men is much higher. So, for example, there are 421 male leaders in Age of Empires 2, but only 5 women. The narrative portrait is clear. Men did the ruling in the past. What we can note, though, is that the numbers are rising. Later games have more female leaders than earlier games.
Looking at which female characters appear most often in the analyzed games, this graph shows all those that are mentioned more than once. Most women in this dataset are AI leaders, by which I mean they may represent an enemy faction, and that's all. Only a few appear as actual heroines or units. Most of the female AI leaders come from Europe. Isabella, Victoria, Elizabeth I, Catherine the Great, Joan of Arc, Boudica, and Theodora. And we're counting Byzantine as a late Roman Empire and thus Europe. Even Cleopatra, if you want to say so, as she was at least partly Greek. All of them were queens or leaders that are often featured in other pop cultural media as well, for example, in documentaries and movies. And so they are known to the West for something historically they did, such as Catherine the Great for settling Germans in Russia, Boudica for leading a revolt against Rome, and Joan of Arc for leading the French army. Wu Cao and Judith are probably the only ones here that are less known in Europe. But still, the Eurocentrism is obvious. Having taken a look at our data quantitatively, we will now focus on 3 specific case studies that tell us a little bit more about which women are generally chosen for these kind of video games and why.
Isabella I of Castile or Spain is the most often used female character in the analyzed games, probably because she played a role in conquering the New World by financing Columbus. In the Civilization series, the focus is placed on her personal faith and her ability to build a strong naval military. She is depicted modestly with covered hair and no cleavage. In Age of Empires 3, however, she is much more sexualized. In this game, her outer appearance is congruent to her character, showing cleavage and a pearl chain that focuses the gaze on her generous bust. The color of her lips matches the one of her dress. Let's listen to some of her quotes.
So demanding, but all right. Some big, strong horseman will certainly impress the enemy. You are so demanding, but your request must wait. So fast, but leave some resources for other things. My explorer is too hasty. He will get a spanking when he returns. Greetings, pet. It is a pleasure to have you at my side. Together, we will soon have the enemy begging for mercy. Your score was most impressive last time. I will do my best to keep up.
The example of Isabella shows that one character can be depicted in very different ways. While the Civilization series treats her mostly as a leader of her nation, in Regalia and Sirius, in Age of Empires 3 she is, quite ahistorically as she led a rather austere lifestyle, sexualized as a woman to the gratification of the presumed male players. The implicit story told about her is quite clear.
Next, let's take a look at the character of Joan of Arc in the Age of Empires series. It might come as a surprise to some of you, but in the first installment of Age of Empires, no women at all appeared in the campaigns. Not as leaders, but also not as villagers. The towns are all simply made up of men. As one Reddit poster noted, it is a commonly known fact that women weren't invented until the Middle Ages. Luckily, they do appear in Age of Empires 2. It takes a couple of levels and civilizations to play through, but finally, when playing as France, you encounter your first female leader, Joan of Arc. In the first scenario, she appears in her unmounted form as Joan the maid, as you can see on the picture on your slide, and in scenarios 2 to 5, she appears as Joan of Arc on a horse. Unfortunately, however, her character is narrated as nothing but a damsel in distress. In her first mission, she is accompanied by 2 soldiers, Bertrand and Jean de Metz, who protect her on her route to Chinon. In the 4 following scenarios, she has an all-male army around her to keep her safe. It is the voices of these male companions that you hear in the dialogues and cutscenes. Joan does never speak for herself throughout the campaigns. This is especially noticeable in this game, as the female villagers in the campaigns do other small phrases when you click on them, such as, "Yes, sir," indicating that the producers did hire a female voice actor for the game, but deliberately decided not to give Joan a personal dialogue. So when the courier welcomes Jean by saying, "The Dauphin will see you now," no response is uttered. Thereby, Joan is not the active hero in this scenario, though she is the main character. She is relieved here of any agency.
The last topic we want to focus on are the tasks of the female units within the game. Strategy games usually focus on economics, politics, and most obviously, the military. The villagers' economic tasks are the extraction of resources such as wood, stone, gold, and food, and even though there are no women in Age of Empires 1, as noted, in Age of Empires 2 and 3, these tasks are shared 50-50 by male and female villagers or settlers. However, it is interesting to note what has been chosen to be included in the game and what has not. Any economic tasks done inside the house or in the courtyard, for example, historically the domain of women are not portrayed. You won't be seeing any villagers produce cloth or lace, make and sell baskets, nor any Sumerian woman brewing beer or Roman woman running a shop from her home.
And one important economic task, one could say, is not shown at all: reproduction. In these kind of games, you never hear the cry of a baby, though labor and child rearing can actually be seen as the most basic economic activity, without which your economy quite surely will dwindle. One wonders how these kind of games would have looked like if women had started making them.
Another thing that is striking is that it was apparently possible to include women as villagers, but not as the more elaborate and more powerful units in the game, the armies. In the historical written sources, female warriors are indeed rarely portrayed. However, in Europe we know of female warriors as part of the Celts, the Vikings and the Scythian societies. And we would like to Pamela Tola's Women Warriors to read up on them and on many others. Women from these cultures, Scythians, Celts, Vikings, sometimes do appear in campaigns or special scenarios in the games, but always as individual exceptions.
A regularly appearing female unit are the female medics in Civ 6, evoking the image of early modern nuns patching up soldiers. On the other hand, Age of Empires includes monasteries with monks, but no nuns or priestesses, so women are also ignored in the religious areas of the game. The last thing we would like to point out is that setting the defining elements of strategy games as the economy, politics, and military are in itself deliberate choices. Though civilizations does sometimes focus on cultural achievements, here too, rarely female protagonists are featured in those. Social elements like hospitals and schools or other areas that are often populated by women could have been reasonably included, but developers chose not to do so. And thus we can see that women are included in the games, but when they do, she is relegated to do rather easy tasks. How do women players react to this? To quote Nimsip from the Girls Gamer Reddit channel talking about Age of Empires 2, "The knight unit line is never explicitly gendered, so I just assume my horde of paladins are a female exclusive order as they stomp my foes."
In conclusion, the inclusion of women in historical strategy games has had a long development. Looking at the Age of Empires and Civilization series, we found that though the number of female leaders is rising in these games, many of these are still European focused, and quite often they are heavily sexualized. In campaigns, women are the exception. Though sometimes important individuals are shown, these are side characters or damsels in distress that lack any agency. Women have always made up half of the workforce, but in these games they hardly appear. the economic, political, and military contributions of women to our historical development is underrepresented, to say the least. Luckily, the tide is slowly changing. Games like Zero AD, Crusader Kings 3, and Old World are much more inclusive, showing women as active agents, influencing and reacting to the historical circumstances around them. We can only applaud these kind of endeavors and hope to see much more of them in the future. However, this is the new trailer of Age of Empires 4. Let's count. How many women do you see?
Time changes everyone and everything. Empires will rise, kingdoms will fall. The grounds of battle become stained with fire and blood. But our thirst for adventure, exploration, discovery, and conquest will stand the test of time. Together, we have battled through history. Now, a new age is upon us.
As one can see, there's still a lot of space for improvement.